I'm reading 1 Peter chapter 2, 9 through 12. 1 Peter chapter 2, 9 through 12. It's page 1391 in the Pew Bible. But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who calls you out of darkness and to his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but are now a people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have attained mercy. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify God in the day of visitation.
We are so thankful for the presence of each one this morning. We are glad that you have come. If you are visiting, we hope that you'll come back. And as was mentioned by John earlier, we hope you'll stay for the potluck after our worship. I want to introduce to you a speaker today. Brad Smith is here visiting and interviewing for the Family Life Minister position. He met with the elders yesterday. Some of the ones who were here for the VBS Workday got to meet Brad, Tiffany, Brinley, Maya, and Jackson as they were around yesterday as well. So be sure and speak to the family and get to know Brad. But Brad's going to speak to us this morning. We look forward to hearing what he has to say, that being a Christian isn't normal. And so we can certainly look forward to his message today. Brad?
Good morning. So again, I want to thank the congregation for inviting us down. It is good to be back here in Florida. I mentioned this morning in class, the kids were excited to see Florida. First thing that they pointed out was palm trees. The joy of a palm tree can just bring the greatest joy to a kid's face. I'm talking about my wife. But we had a good time yesterday, and of course we're having a good time so far this morning. If not, just keep the smiles on, and that'll be okay. I was feeling confident, feeling good and encouraged, because I saw Hunter sitting there on the front row. I didn't know he was going to be reading the scripture. I thought he was my bodyguard, but now he's gone. I do hope, though, that you do stay for the potluck. Allow us the opportunity to be able to get to know you, to talk to you. You can ask us any question that you want. As long as it doesn't pertain to my Social Security number or bank accounts, we'll be okay. One other thing. Tonight, please do come back tonight. Tonight's lesson is going to be called Preparing to Prevent. And basically, it's the idea where every one of us, we are the body of God. And in order for us to function, we need every part of us to function properly. And if we don't, then things start to happen. Now, when we think about our responsibilities as Christians, we are either doing something to prepare, to prevent things from happening, or if we're not doing anything, then we're preventing to prepare, which is going to open the door for things to happen. So please do come back and allow me to be able to share that message with you. If you don't come back, then I feel like you don't like me, and then I'm a very sensitive guy, and that won't be good. But again, we thank you for inviting us down, and we really do enjoy our time here. As I mentioned, the lesson this morning is called Winning Isn't Normal. It sounds kind of odd, but it came from an article from a friend of mine. He's a basketball coach in Oklahoma, and every once in a while on Facebook during the season, he'll post these various type of articles to help inspire, to encourage, maybe to teach his athletes or even to the parents. And he shared this article that had a really good message just for athletes and for the parents, but it also has a good message to us as Christians. The article is called Winning Isn't Normal, and it goes like this. Winning isn't normal. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with winning. It just isn't normal. In fact, it's highly unusual. Every competition has only one winner, and no matter how many people entered, only one person or one team can win the championship. Winning is unusual, and as such, it requires unusual action. In order to win, you must do extraordinary things. You cannot just be one of the crowd. The crowd doesn't win. You have to be willing to stand out and act differently. Your actions need to reflect unusual values and priorities, and you have to value success more than others do. You have to want it more, and wanting it more is a decision that you make, not just some inherent quality or burning inner drive or inspiration. You have to make that value a priority. You cannot train like everyone else. You have to train more, and you have to train better. You cannot talk like everyone else. You cannot think like everyone else. You cannot be willing to join the crowd. You cannot do what is expected, to act in a socially accepted manner, to do what is in. You need to be willing to stand out in the crowd, to consistently take exceptional action. If you want to win, you need to accept the risks and perhaps the loneliness, because winning isn't normal. And like I said, as an athlete, as a coach, those are great thoughts. As a Christian, every once in a while, I get these ideas from articles or movies or whatever, and just something within it pops out, and this is one of those things. When we think about who we are as Christians, especially from the verses that Hunter just read from us from Peter, there's nothing about us as Christians that should be considered normal. For me, I grew up believing I was not a normal kid, and I thought that was a bad thing. But now I can say I'm not a normal person because I'm a Christian, and I feel good about it. We are a highly unusual type of people. Again, think about what Peter said. He says, you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for God's own choosing, a people who are considered in this world to be aliens and strangers. We are a people to abstain from fleshly lust and desires, to keep our behavior excellent, and because of these things, we will be regarded as evildoers. Not any part of that sounds to be like a normal thing, a usual thing. In fact, it's the opposite. It sounds to be anything but normal and something that's completely, highly unusual. But becoming a Christian and being a Christian is not a normal event. It is something that is highly unusual, and if we as Christians want to receive that eternal glory, to be champions as Christians, then we must be willing to have that winning type of mentality, that winning type of faith, to do the things that it requires in order for us to achieve that victory. If you have your Bibles, let's go over to Matthew chapter 14. We'll be taking our lesson from an event that takes place there with Jesus walking on water. But we're not going to focus on what Jesus did. We're going to focus a little bit more on what Peter did, and because he did some things that was pretty unusual in regards to that situation. At this time, we just read about how Jesus finished his Sermon on the Mount. We just learned about Jesus feeding the 5,000 men plus women and children from that bountiful feast of 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. People said that they ate so much that they were satisfied, meaning that they were pretty much kind of what we resemble after Thanksgiving feast. Kick back in the chair, loosen the belt, bust out your gut, that type of idea. They were filled. They collected all of the leftovers from 12 basketfuls. I mean, when God cast a blessing, he cast a blessing. Shortly after that, Jesus started to get the idea that some of these people were wanting to make him an earthly king. Somehow the message got completely messed up. So he said, okay, this is a great time. Let's send everybody home, get some rest. He even sent his disciples away. And this is where we kind of pick up for our lesson. Look at Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 22. He says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat to go ahead of him on the other side, and he sent the crowds away. And after he had sent the crowds away, he went up upon the mountain by himself to pray, something we see Jesus doing very often. And it was evening, and he was there by himself, and the boat was already a long distance away from the land. Some people say it was probably about 3 to 4 miles there in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. The boat was being battered by waves, for the wind was contrary. And then the 4th night, this is about 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning. So think about this. These guys, they left the night before. They're sailing across the Sea of Galilee to the other side, but now they're battling this storm all until about 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning. They were battling a long distance away from the wind, for the wind was contrary, and the 4th night he came to them walking on the sea. Now, this same event is recorded also in Mark chapter 6 and John chapter 6. I like Mark's take on this event, especially at this particular time, because to me it's just hilarious. These guys left the night before. They're in the middle of the sea. Some of these guys they made their livings on the sea. They're fishermen. They've been in rough waters. But this was different. They were battling till 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning. The wind was blowing them all over the place. The wind was coming up, or the waves were pushing them around all over the place. These guys were tired. They were sore. Some of them who's not used to being in the water that much, especially rough waters, were probably hanging over, giving the sea the blessing of the meal from before. I mean, they are tired. They're wet. They're scared. They're nervous. But in Mark's account, he says in chapter 6, Jesus saw them, and he started walking on the water, and Jesus' intent was just to walk on by. Now, picture that, because, again, to me, this is hilarious. Hopefully it is you, otherwise this is going to be completely awkward. They're out there in the middle of the sea battling all this stuff, and Jesus is just trotting around. Hey, guys, what's up? They're going to keep on going. See, you guys didn't laugh, so it was awkward. Jesus wasn't going to just stop. He was just going to keep on going, allow these guys to battle the sea by themselves. That's just funny to me. But the guys at the moment, they were sitting there saying, this is a ghost. I mean, they believed in ghosts. That was always been a mythology type of idea. They saw something that was walking on water. Nobody's going to think, hey, that's a human being. They were thinking this is a ghost. So they cried out. Jesus heard them. He says, fear not, for it is I. And this is where we start to see some unusual things, if we haven't seen it already. But this is where Peter starts to show us something that is completely unusual. Look at verse 28. Peter said to him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. The unusual thing that Peter does is he cries out. All Peter needed to do was to hear the beckoning call of the Lord, and his will would be done. Peter wasn't going to say, hey, God, I want you to tell me to come out. He wasn't going to try to enforce his will upon God. He's going to allow God to tell him what he wanted to do. God, if it is your will, command me, and I'll do whatever it is that you want me to do. That is unusual. That is, in some cases, especially in today's world, not normal, to intentionally, purposely put ourselves in subjection to somebody else's authority. We have 3 kids, and we fight just about every day trying to get them to abide by our authority. You guys dealt with that? Oh, goodness, this is awkward. But Peter is intentionally putting himself into subjection to God. Tell me what it is that you want me to do, and I'll do it. Even in this situation, just tell me. Here we find the basis of our faith. Paul said in Romans chapter 10, verse 17, so faith comes by hearing, and hearing the word of Christ. The more we actively, intentionally listen to somebody, we are giving them control of our lives, whether we think about it or not. Whether we mean to do that or not, because we're allowing them to influence our lives. They influence our minds. They influence our decisions. They influence our actions. The more we listen to these type of people. Now, we may sit there and say they don't have that type of influence, but they actually do. Kids, how many times do you hear your parents say, hey, you guys need to turn the radio because you guys don't need to listen to that stuff because of the message? Mom, Dad, it doesn't affect me. I promise it doesn't. Yeah, it does. They've been kids. How about your friends? Hey, kids, you guys need to make sure you choose your friends wisely because I don't think they're a great fit. I'm influencing them. No, well, maybe, but they're also influencing you. And it even happens to us as adults because the people we hang out with work when we're by ourselves. Nobody else is watching. Wife isn't there to keep us in control. Yeah, we're being influenced all the time. The more we're around certain people, the more we invite people to talk to us, to listen to, or to have an impact upon our lives, we give them control. Paul said in Romans chapter 16, he talks about that there's really only 2 options when it comes to our submission to certain authorities. He says we are either slaves to obedience that leads to righteousness or slaves to sin which leads to destruction. There is no third option. The third option is one that we often try to incorporate ourselves, to push into the scriptures, to push into God's decision. The third option is the idea where, hey, I want the best of both worlds. The church in Laodicea tried to do that. God says, look, you're either hot or you're cold, but the majority are trying to be lukewarm. God says that's never been an option. If you want to be lukewarm, but realize that's just the same as those who are doing nothing. We have to make a choice. We are either slaves to God or we are slaves to sin. You get to choose. There is no middle. You try to be in the middle, you're actually making a decision to be slaves to sin. We can't have it both ways. There is no gray area. There is no third option. So whatever we choose to do, Paul says in Colossians chapter 3, whatever you choose to do in word or deed, do all in the name of, all by the authority of Jesus Christ, giving thanks to him, to God, through the Father. Now, this is not to say that God is going to do whatever I want him to do. It doesn't work that way. But we must choose to do whatever it is that God wants us to do. Now, I understand sometimes that gets to be a negative rap, especially from the friends or families that are not members of the church. You guys are just goody-goodies. You have to do with this. You can't do all these other things that are fun. And eventually that has an influence upon us, especially when we're younger, because that means we can't do certain things or we shouldn't be doing certain things. And our life is just a bummer. Do they use that word anymore? It's depressing because they're out there having fun, doing things that are from what God says is wrong, and we have to stay here and be Christians. You ever seen what God does for his people? If you ever need a reminder, go over to Psalm chapter 23. He says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In other words, he's the only person I need and want in my life. I shall not go without him. That's how I want him a part of my life. Why? Because of all the things he does. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He provides the best and more than what we can ever imagine. In the other section of it, he talks about how he prepares a feast in the presence of my enemies. Now, you get the illustration, Jesus being a shepherd, we are the sheep. I don't know if you guys ever been around sheep, but they are pretty stubborn people. God got to pick the right animal for us, right? They are pretty stubborn people, and when you try to force them to make them do something, it doesn't work. And the only time, from what I've understood, I've never been a shepherd. I've worked with sheep before for a short period of time, but they say they are so skittish that the only time that they're actually going to lay down in your presence is if they have complete confidence in who you are as their protector, their provider. God says in the impression of Psalm chapter 23 that even in the presence of your enemies, he'll provide a feast for you and you could sit there calmly, peacefully without having to worry about a single thing. That's what God does for you. He doesn't have all these rules, all these laws, all these things that we say that might be considered to be burdens to us. They're not there to make us feel bad, but they're there in order to protect us, to keep us safe, to help us to get from this place upon earth to our eternal salvation. He's there looking out for us, to provide for us, to give us the best of everything that we could possibly want. Like Peter, it comes to a point in our lives where we need to start crying out and say, God, command me. Take control of my life. I don't have all the answers. I don't know the right direction. I'm lost. So I'm going to give you control. Tell me what it is. Guide me in the right direction. We must be willing to do that which is unnatural or not normal. Something that is completely and highly unusual. We need to cry out. Second thing that we see that's unusual about Peter is that he actually takes action. He steps out. Look at verse 29. Jesus said, come, and Peter got out of the boat, and he walked on water, and he came to Jesus. Now, despite all the conditions that was occurring at that moment, the winds, the waves, the people that are shouting, some people that are sick over the side of the boat, despite of all the distractions that is going around Peter at this moment, Peter is taking some sort of action. He told God, God, command me what it is that you want to do. God says, okay, I want you to come out to me. Now, here's where Peter could have said, hey, wait a minute, let's slow down. Do you realize where we are? We're in the middle of the sea. Do you realize I'm just a human? I'm not God like you. If I step out, I'm going to sink. Do you not see the wind or the waves? Do you not feel the wind? He could second guess what he's being commanded to do. But he doesn't. Command me what you want me to do. Jesus said, come. Peter put his faith where his mouth is. He says he's a Christian. He says he's a follower. He says he is a complete, true, honest disciple. And he's actually living it. That within itself can be highly unusual, something that is not normal. Here you find the evidence of our faith. Hebrews 11, chapter 1, it says that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. It's the assurance, the substance, the underlying support that we need to help us to do the things that we do. But it's based on evidence. It's a conviction that we have, not knowing that Jesus isn't just some guy, but based on all the things that we've heard, based on all the things that he has done, we have a conviction, a true conviction of who he is, that he is who he says he is. He truly is the Son of God. And because of that, our faith can be true in him. We can truly follow whatever it is that he says he wants us to do and be confident about it. Oftentimes we hear the people say that our faith is blind. No, it's not. They say it's blind because we can't see God, we can't feel God, we can't touch God. I can't introduce God to you. That doesn't mean our faith is blind. Our faith is not something that should be physically touched within God. It's something that has to be felt within ourselves, based on evidence. And God has provided so much of evidence to prove that he truly does exist. Without faith, he says in verse 6, it is impossible to please him. So he who comes to God must believe that he is and that he is a rewarder of those who seek him. Now this is a struggle because again, sometimes, and we have some friends that sit there and say that all we need to have is faith. In James in chapter 2, he says that's completely wrong. In James chapter 2, and starting verse 14 through verse 20, we start to have that battle between faith and action. James says, you show me your faith without action, and I'll show you my faith by my actions. You believe that you can prove that you have faith without any action. In verse 20, he says, you foolish fellow. In other words, you are completely delusional. If your faith is not supported by some type of action, some type of commitment, some type of evidence that you truly say that you have faith and confidence in God, if you can't prove that to yourself or to anybody that has a question, then our faith is in question as already. It's not real. Even demons can believe. Anybody can believe. That's the easy part. Anybody can sit there and say, I'm a Christian. Anybody can say, I'm a follower of God. I read and I study and I do all these things. But if it's not supported by action, that's the thing that separated demons from anything else. They believed God, but they didn't support it by their actions. Faith and works go hand in hand, and Peter proved just that. I believe in God. I'll follow. You just tell me what it is that you want to do, and I'll do it. And he did it. He stepped out. He took that unusual action. And we must do the same. If we are willing to follow after God, to cry out to God and submit to his commands, then we must be willing to be obedient to his command without restraint. That will be unusual. That will be in times today something that is not normal because of what that requires. That might require us to lose friendships. That might require us losing relationships. That might require us losing relationships with families. Out of my entire family on both sides, mom and dad, I'm the only one that's a member of the church. And sometimes those family get-togethers, they're not so much fun anymore. They know that I'm different, but that doesn't mean that they're going to change. It might require us to give up certain activities. And that can be a challenge as well. There are so many distractions in today's world. The older my kids get, the more activities they become part of, I'm starting to learn how challenging that can be. Our kids, all three of them, about 4 years ago, they started in a theater. They get to, during the summer, they have a theater camp, and then every once in a while, they've been asked to be a part of the college theater production that happens later in that fall. And oftentimes their practices happen on a Wednesday night or even on a Sunday night, especially when it's closer to the showtime. I guess that's what that's called. And sometimes it could be a test to us as far as where do our true devotions lie. I'll admit sometimes we failed. But it can be challenging because we have to prove where our devotion truly does lie. Does it lie within ourselves or does it lie within God? We have to be able to put our trust, our action, our faith into action. One of the verses that we looked at this morning when it came to something like this, we were talking about James chapter 1, talking about the trials that we face and making sure that when we face these trials, we're proving ourselves that we are who we say we are. God will never allow you to be tempted or tried beyond what you can handle. In other words, we saw in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, if you're faced with an opportunity of, okay, should I go to services? Should I go to this event? Should I go to participate of whatever it is in this need to do? Should I talk to this person about God? Should I stand up for who I am as a Christian? Should I stand up for God? Should I rebuke the person who is speaking against God? Or, all these shouldas or ifs. All of those are tests. All of those are trials. All of those are opportunities for us to do something that is good or do something that is lacking and oftentimes leads to the wrong direction. God says, I will not allow you to be tempted or tried beyond what you can handle. In other words, you have an opportunity to prove to yourself something that God already knows about you. That you truly are the person that you say that you are and that you tell other people that you are. Sometimes it's even telling or proving to ourselves that we are the Christian that we tell our spouse, that we are the Christian that we tell our kids. Sometimes even those are the hardest tests and trials that we face. We have to put our faith into actions. And the good thing about it is that we get rewarded, and we get rewarded greatly. The third thing that we see that's unusual in this account is, actually we see something that is normal. Look at verse 30. So we got Peter, waves battling all over the place, boat is getting blown around, tossed around. Peter cries out, God, tell me what it is that you wanted me to do. God says, okay, I want you to come. So Peter steps out of the boat. Picking up at verse 30, he says, but seeing the wind, Peter became frightened and he began to sink and he cried out, Lord, save me. The normal thing is that when faced opposition, Peter started to become distracted. He started to lose his focus. This, in a sense, is a normal thing. We see that happening very often. We faced with a certain trial, we're faced with a certain test, and we get so distracted by what our friends think, what our family thinks, what's more important to us as far as, well, do I lose my spot on a team, or do I lose my position in a play, or who knows what the situation might be. We become so distracted by all those things that we lose our focus, and like Peter, we begin to sink. Despite his courage, despite his obedience, Peter takes a few steps and he begins to sink. Now, in my mind, I don't have this pictured as some instantaneous, there he goes. Here's Peter, and there's gone. We don't see Peter. To me, it's a gradual descent. He was focused enough on Christ to be able to step out into this water, to take a few steps, and then start to lose his focus. It's a gradual descent. Peter was recognizing at that moment what was happening. I'm losing my focus. I'm losing my connection. And he became fearful. I don't think he's fearful because he's about to lose his life, but fearful because he is losing his connection with God. He recognized that what his distractions was leading was to his own destruction. The unusual part is that he did something about it. Here we see the importance of having our focused faith. See the importance of having the ability to be able to block out those distractions. An unfocused faith will leave opportunities open for torment. It opens the door in order for Satan to do the things that he wants to do. The scripture says, Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 5, that he is this roaring lion walking around seeking someone to devour. He is seeking somebody who has their guard dropped enough where he could just pounce and do whatever it is that he wants to do. It happens when we become distracted. An unfocused faith is an opportunity that allows us to be able to drift off course. Jesus said in Matthew that many will enter the narrow, or we are to enter the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and broad that leads to destruction, and many will enter through it. And then you get into verse 21. And in my account, this is one of the scariest verses that I see throughout the scriptures. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter." The reason to me why that seems like it's the scariest verse within the Bible is because there's going to be so many people on the judgment day. They're expecting, I've been a good guy. I've attended church. I've read my Bible. I've studied my Bible. I know where I'm going. And they get in front of God. He has the book of judgment open in front of them. And they hear something completely different that they weren't expecting. But Lord, did I not pray? Did I not study? Did I not do all these things that you tell me to do? See, we can't fool God. I can fool you, you can fool me, but we can't fool God. He knows what we truly are on the inside. And that's what he's judging. He doesn't judge based on just our outward show. He judges what's on the inside. There's going to be a lot of people on Judgment Day that's going to be surprised and shocked. But it's always been their choice. It's easy to have faith and say we have faith and do the things that showing people that we have this faith. But God says, he who does the will of my Father, he who puts that faith into action and action according to his will enter in the kingdom of heaven. When we begin to focus our faith on our problems and distractions, whatever that may be, it's easy to see how we start to lose our faith. But changes can happen, and it happens when we start to make that transformation. We have to change our minds in order to change our abilities to act. Throughout this transformation, we see, again, some things that are kind of unusual. Peter started to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." And then you see there in verse 30. But seeing the wind, picking up in verse 30. But seeing the wind, he became frightened and began to sink and cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately, Jesus reached down to help him. There's a sense of humility in regards to our faith. We have to recognize what our distractions are doing. We have to recognize what our decisions are doing. If they are causing us to sink, then we have to be humble enough, like Peter, to sit there and say, "I need your help." Otherwise, we just continue to sink. Peter cried out. Not only did he cry out, he reached out. He reached out because he believed Jesus truly is who he says he is, that he is the Son of God. Not only did he reach out, but he repented. And this is a hard part. You think about Peter. Peter is the one who is willing to give his life. He was going to draw his sword when the soldiers came. He is the one that was going to rebuke Jesus, saying, I'll never deny you. I mean, he was the one that was always, probably out of all the disciples that we've seen up to this point, that was the most dedicated. But he had to humble himself to say, I can't do anything, or I can't do this on my own. Please forgive me. Please help me. We have to confess that truly Jesus is the God that he says he is, and that he will save our lives. Not only that, but we need to make a change within our lives. Now, if we haven't been a part of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, then right now, currently in our state of sin, we only have one future to look forward to. That's the one that we don't want to have. That's the one that leaves us with that opportunity where we might get really disappointed on the day of judgment. If we are a part of the body of Christ, then we need to go back and really reflect about who we say that we really are, and do our actions prove it. We need to make sure that we are walking faithfully with God and continue until the day ends. This is unusual because humility in today's world is not something that is often seen. To sit there and say that I need help and I need God to help me. One last thing that we see in regards to this event. Unusual faith bows down. Jesus reached down, he pulled up Peter, and after it, they climbed into the boat. The wind stopped immediately, verse 33, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, You certainly are God's Son. Unusual faith bows down in great recognition. Winning is not normal. It's something that is highly unusual. It's something that requires greater actions, greater commitment, greater desire than anything that we have ever seen before. We have to want it more. We have to desire it more. We have to put it into action more than anybody else if we want to be champions. We teach that all the time to our athletes. But we need to teach that to ourselves as well as Christians. Being a Christian is not normal. We should not be normal people. We should not be recognized in this world as just some usual guy, some casual guy, some normal guy, because we should be anything but. This morning, we have an opportunity to reflect about who we are right now. Are you a normal person? Do you want to be normal? Or do you want to be unusual? Do you want to be different? Do you need God within your lives? Are you like Peter? You were focused at one time when you committed yourself to Christ, but now you become so distracted that we're recognizing that our life is becoming more and more separated away from God, and we need help in order to get it back. If that's who you are, then you just need to cry out, reach out, and then you allow this congregation to help you, allow the elders to help you, but more importantly, allow the God to help you. Whatever it is that the need that you face this morning, do not go from this auditorium without doubt. Be confident in regards to your relationship. Have God into your life and find a peace that he brings with it. If we can help you in any way, please come as we stand and sing.